Hey guys, tonight we're going to descend into something quietly unsettling. A truth not shouted by textbooks, but whispered beneath stone altars, what the medieval Aztecs believed about human hearts. You might think of the heart as metaphor love, courage, life itself. But for the Aztecs, it was no metaphor. It was literal motion. The heart was the only part of you that kept dancing even after death arrived. And here's the quiet paradox. These were people who believed stopping a heart could keep the world turning. The stillness of one thing made everything else move. You probably won't survive this worldview. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where we're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge barefoot across a sun-warmed stone causeway, your chest catching light with each breath. Somewhere behind the temples, drums murmur like a heartbeat outside your own. You pass murals, eagles, serpents, flowering knives. But it's that one image, again and again, the heart, emerging like a small red sun between hands. You begin to understand that to live among the Aztecs was to carry your heart not inside you, but ahead of you. Not in metaphor, not in symbol, in blood. They called it the yolotl, a word that didn't just mean heart, but also life, center, motion. It pulsed with meaning, and not just poetic meaning, but logistical. This was what moved the cosmos forward. The gods had sacrificed themselves to build this world, and now you owed interest collected daily, in your veins. In their cosmology, the fifth sun, the age you now inhabit, is a fragile experiment barely holding together. The previous suns had ended in elemental disaster wind, fire, jaguars, floods. This one could collapse too. But unlike the past, the gods had left instructions. To keep the fifth sun aloft, you had to feed it. Not crops, not prayers, not good behavior, but hearts still hot, still twitching. You weren't killing people to terrorize others or punish sin. You were fueling the engine, and so the quiet horror settles in. It's not malice that turns you toward the blade. It's maintenance, like cleaning the gutters or adding oil to a lamp. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs truly believed the sun would die without blood, or whether this belief was encouraged politically to justify expansion and obedience. But in the thick breath of the jungle, as the sun climbs overhead and begins to bake the temples white hot, none of that matters. Because the belief was real enough to build pyramids aligned with celestial bodies, enough to carve sacrificial altars in the shape of butterflies, creatures that, like hearts, flutter. Enough that the word for to offer a heart and to flower are linguistically related. Life bloomed from death. You couldn't have spring without rupture. The ritual begins long before the knife. The chosen one is bathed, perfumed, adorned in feathers and jewels. You're not just a person, you're a god in costume, embodying the deity for whom you will be offered. You're walked through the crowd like a celebrity. This is the strange, quiet dignity of it. No chains, no shackles. There's a kind of awful honor to it all. If you scream, if you run, the ritual is ruined. The gods might reject the gift. But if your chest rises and falls calmly, if you ascend the temple steps with steady breath, then you become more than meat. You become music. They believed the motion of your heart sang through the sky. It wasn't removed. It was released, like smoke, like song. One priest holds the arms, another the legs, and the fourth wields the obsidian blade so sharp it splits skin with a whisper. The moment before contact is oddly silent. You've probably never thought about that silence before the moment when someone knows they're about to lose their heartbeat forever, and yet there's no scream. That's what stays with you. That's what makes this so unnervingly still. And then it's over in seconds. The heart is raised high to the sun, your final offering. The priest's hands are wet, but steady. There's no mess. This has been done before, hundreds of times. On some days, thousands. You're not special, and that's the strange comfort of it. You're not alone. You're a part of a tide, a rhythm, something bigger. Mainstream archaeology confirms that some Aztec temples processed so many sacrifices, they had dedicated blood channels beneath them like a drainage system. Even the sacred has plumbing. And yet, curiously, the offering was often accompanied by flowers, incense, song. not unlike a wedding, because for the Aztecs, this wasn't a horror movie, it was reciprocity. The gods gave you rain. You gave back rhythm. The heart was just the courier. The real message was gratitude. But not everyone got the blade. Sometimes, the ceremony ended with a symbolic offering, a dough heart, a clay figurine, a roasted maize effigy filled with honey. These were the peaceful days, the dry season festivals, the moments when the gods were sated or at rest. But those moments were rare. The sky always needed something, and it didn't wait politely. You learned to live with that pressure, like tax season, but cosmic, like needing to breathe, but for the world. And so, the heart stayed at the center, not just of the body, but of everything. Calendars, war, love, mourning, even laughter. Because, strangely, laughter was sacred, too. Some victims laughed all the way up the stairs, not out of madness, but because in the face of being turned into pure motion, what else is there to do but dance? You walk past a mural again, and this time, you notice something small you didn't before. One figure is not having their heart removed, but offering it themselves. A hand through the ribs, a gift to the sky. Maybe it's myth, maybe it's metaphor, but maybe that's the part we're not supposed to see, that deep in the quiet logic of this civilization was a truth even our modern minds flinch from, that the most sacred thing you can give is not your time, your money, or your thoughts. It's the motion that no one else can see, the pulse in your chest, the rhythm you can't fake, the thing that proves you're still here. And even now, lying down, heart slowing beneath your ribs, you might feel the echo of that idea, that your heartbeat isn't just survival, it's a contract. You signed it by being born, and somewhere beneath a vanished temple, that contract still hums in the stone. You wake in the twilight of a stone corridor, your footsteps soft against a floor worn smooth by barefoot generations. The air is warm, slightly sweet with copal smoke, and outside, a red sky droops over the valley like a fading bruise. You don't know how long you've been here, but something in your chest begins to sync with the faint, unhurried drum beats echoing in the distance. Your own heart becomes a percussion instrument in the orchestra of dusk. And now, as the shadows stretch longer, you begin to understand why the Aztecs believed the sun would not rise without your sacrifice. It wasn't vanity or cruelty, it was an ancient wager. In their cosmology, each dawn was not guaranteed. It had to be earned, and the payment, always, was blood. Not just any blood, living blood. Hot, rhythmic, urgent, the sun. They believed fed on that life force. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but hungrily. So every morning, as you blink against first light, remember someone's heart paid for that glow. The logic is strange, but elegant. The gods had bled themselves to make the world, so now humans must repay that debt. The sun god, Huitzilopochtli in particular, demanded his daily portion. He was the warrior god, the hummingbird of the south, and without constant infusions of sacrifice, he would falter. The stars would rise. The world would collapse back into chaos. Historians still debate how literally this was believed, whether the priesthood manipulated the narrative for power, or whether even the rulers lived in terror of celestial hunger. But for the people, the farmers and weavers and warriors, the belief was real. In the only way that matters, it shaped their choices. It gave structure to the sky. And when a belief is carved into stone steps and poured into festival calendars, it's no longer a belief, it's architecture. And the Aztecs didn't see sacrifice as a tragedy. To them, it was a sacred privilege. Imagine being told since birth that your heart, specifically yours, might be chosen to keep the sun alive, that your pulse could be the turning point between survival and darkness. You'd grow up walking beneath banners embroidered with hearts. You'd eat from bowls decorated with knife motifs. Every song, every festival, every market chant would carry the rhythm of that one truth. Hearts are not for keeping, they are for giving. And that's where the quiet tension of Aztec life always lay, in the knowledge that joy and doom were threaded together. Your laughter, your breath, your dance steps under moonlight, all of it could become part of the machinery that moved the heavens. You walk now among the ruins, Where once the sun rose to shine upon crowds gathered in hushed anticipation, you imagine the scene dawn creeping over temple walls, thousands of eyes watching the moment of offering. There's no chaos, no screaming, just stillness. A priest raises the blade, then a heart. For one breathless second, the people wait to see if the sun answers, and then light. The sky swells with color. The gamble worked. Again. Can you feel the relief that must have surged through them? That glow wasn't just sunlight, it was proof. The world still wanted them. The gods still listened. And you, yes, you helped make it happen. The heart, in that moment, became currency, not in the cynical modern sense, but in a sacred, circular economy. You gave, the gods gave back. You danced. The crops grew. You offered your blood, and in return, fire stayed in the sky. It's no coincidence that the Aztecs used the same word tonali for both heat and spiritual energy. They understood warmth not just as temperature, but as intention, as vitality, as evidence of presence. And so, a sacrificed heart wasn't just meat, it was fire. It was light. It was proof that a person had been here and had offered the most unrepeatable thing they possessed, their motion. And still, the most fascinating part is not the moment of death, it's the philosophy behind it. You begin to notice something in the way the temples were built, aligned to the solstices, synchronized with Venus cycles, designed with acoustic tricks to amplify chants. The city itself was an engine of belief. Even the sacrifices took place at specific times, on specific days, when the sky was in the correct mood. They weren't random. They were scheduled, managed. You'd wake on a festival day and know it was time. Maybe not for you, but for someone. You'd hear the songs, smell the incense, see the dancers in jaguar skin, and know that somewhere, a heart was being prepared to leave its body and rise into the ether. And here's something odd, it wasn't always enemies. Sure, captured warriors made up the bulk of sacrificial victims, but sometimes it was volunteers. Sometimes it was children. Sometimes it was people chosen not because they were hated, but because they were loved. The gods demanded the best, and so your beauty, your intelligence, your poise, they didn't save you. They made you eligible. Imagine the silence of that realization. Imagine knowing your goodness made you a candidate for removal. A soft horror, curled like a serpent behind every compliment. Still, not all sacrifices involved literal death. Some ceremonies used symbolic hearts sculpted from dough or shaped from obsidian. In lean times or during plague years. When bodies were scarce or morale low, the priests improvised. A clay heart might be buried with whispered apologies. A honey-filled effigy might be burned as a stand-in. But even these mock rituals retained power, because the belief wasn't in the material, it was in the gesture. The gods, after all, understood intention. That's what the Aztecs believed. The ritual had to look real, feel real, and be offered with true emotional weight. The rest was detail. You stop at a wall, etched with spirals and symbols, and suddenly you realize this isn't about blood. It never really was. It's about movement, about keeping things going. Your own heartbeat, once terrifyingly fragile, now feels like a song you're helping sing. And somewhere beneath the noise of modern life, you begin to wonder if there's a piece of this ancient belief still beating in the world. Maybe not in temples, maybe not with knives, but in the idea that what you give from your core, your warmth, your love, your attention matters, that it fuels something invisible, that it rises like light. The sky grows darker now, deep indigo streaked with orange. A breeze lifts the scent of moss and ash. You sit on a temple step and your chest rises, falls, rises again. And you realize the Aztecs might have been wrong about astronomy, about geology, about politics, but they weren't wrong about one thing, that there is power in the heart. Not because it pumps blood, but because it pulses meaning. You feel that meaning now, in your stillness, in your quiet, in your readiness to keep listening. The plaza stretches before you like a calm, shallow ocean of stone, its symmetry almost meditative, until you remember what used to happen here. You pause in the center and glance down, not at your feet, but at your chest. You feel your own heartbeat as if the stones are listening for it. And in this stillness, you begin to grasp what the Aztecs truly meant when they said the heart held consciousness, not thoughts, not memory, but awareness. The heart wasn't just an organ, it was identity. You weren't considered fully alive until your heart had proven its rhythm matched the sky. The Aztecs believed your heart didn't simply circulate blood, it recorded who you were. When it was extracted, it wasn't just your life that ended, but your story that was lifted skyward. The gods didn't want your flesh, they wanted your essence, preserved in that small, trembling muscle behind your ribs. And so you didn't fear the blade for the pain, it was the exposure, the moment your deepest self would be weighed in the open. This idea wasn't confined to temples. It saturated every part of Aztec life. In Nahuatl, the word for heart yolotl was embedded in words for wisdom, memory, and emotion. You didn't just think, you heart thought. You didn't feel sad you had a tired heart. Even now, the modern Mexican-Spanish phrase, "Mi duele el corazón," my heart hurts, comes not from cardiology, but from lineage. Your emotions didn't happen in your head. They lived in your chest. So when someone gave their heart in sacrifice, it wasn't a poetic turn. It was literal. They were handing over their being, their vibration, their soul. And that's why the ritual had to be clean. The heart had to be intact. Any damage could dishonor the whole offering. Some priests even washed the heart in cold water briefly, just to cool it without stopping its motion, like rinsing a jewel before handing it to a king. You wander now through what used to be the Comcac, the Aztec school for elite boys. And here, too, the lesson was about the heart. Not about strength, not even about obedience, but about clarity. The students were taught to listen to their yolotl, to examine their pulse not as doctors, but as philosophers. Was their heart steady? Was it generous? Was it disciplined? These weren't romantic ideas, they were practical tools. Because to lead, to fight, to sacrifice, you had to be inwardly still. That's how they measured virtue, not by speech, but by vibration. If your heart fluttered in fear, it was an insult to the gods. If it beat with honor, it could be heard in the stars. Imagine living with that pressure. Every crush, every argument, every rush of anxiety, proof not just of emotion, but of cosmic weakness. Even architecture reflected this belief. The most sacred temples were designed so that sound chant, drum, heartbeat echoed in specific ways. Some corners of the great Templo Mayor could bounce back a whisper, as if the structure itself had a pulse. Historians still argue whether this was intentional acoustic design or accidental genius, but it fits the pattern. You begin to sense the Aztecs didn't see the world in objects, but in currents, in flow, in rhythm. The gods, too, were defined not just by their traits, but by how they moved. Huitzilopochtli, he who left hummingbird trails in the wind. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who slithered through knowledge. Tlaloc, the rain god who wept floods. All movement, all vibration. And the heart, the bridge between human and divine. A tiny, pulsing ambassador. You pass an old obsidian mirror half buried in volcanic dust, and suddenly you understand the deeper fear that to open the chest was not only to offer the heart, but to see it. Because in Aztec belief, your heart reflected you, not just morally, but visually. A clean heart was smooth, red, vibrant. A diseased or sluggish one meant the gods had already turned away. Some priests claimed they could read the future by looking at the twitch of a heart after removal, not as fortune-telling, but as diagnosis. Were the gods satisfied? Was the city safe? Was the sun secure for another day? Imagine a society where the weather forecast comes not from satellites, but from how a heart spasms in the hand. And this is where it gets even stranger. They believed your heart continued to perceive after death, for several moments, maybe longer. They had no concept of a brain-based consciousness. The chest held awareness, and until the last twitch, it could register gratitude or horror or peace. Some rituals involved whispering final words to the heart before it was lifted affirmations, apologies, instructions, because the heart wasn't just going to the gods, it was reporting. Think of that. Every beat, a message, every offering, a communique. You weren't just fuel, you were correspondence. The fringe belief preserved in some lesser-known codices is that the heart could even return. There's a myth of a warrior whose heart once offered, refused to die. It bounced from the priest's hands and, guided by hummingbirds, flew back into his chest. He awoke, neither dead nor alive, and vanished into the jungle. Some say he still wanders, heart blazing like an ember beneath his ribs. Scholars call it symbolic, but the point isn't the biology, it's the fear. The quiet, ancient terror that maybe your essence can't be contained. That once seen, once exposed, it might become untethered. That your heartbeat might echo louder than anyone expected. And perhaps that's the reason for the ritual's precision. Everything had to go right. The calendar date, the planetary alignment, the time of day, the incision angle, even the state of mind of the sacrifice. Because this wasn't medicine, it was choreography. The gods were watching, and you didn't want to fumble the steps. Some days were better than others. Sacrifices performed during solar eclipses were seen as especially potent. During droughts, hearts were given not just on altars, but buried near springs. The pulse was sent underground to stir the water spirits. The logic is haunting that your heart might soften the sky, that your pain could call rain. You lean against a wall carved with spiraling vines, and you notice each one leads to a central shape, not a sun, not a god, but a heart. Stylized, open, rising, again and again, and it strikes you how different this is from modern faiths, which often hide the body, speak in abstraction, bury the physical beneath metaphor. The Aztecs did the opposite. They laid the body bare. They gave the gods something tactile, something warm, something unmistakably real, and somehow they found beauty in it, not despite the blood, but because of it. Because the blood meant presence. The blood proved you'd shown up, that you'd risked something. So now, as your own heart slows for the night, you carry that strange thought with you that the most sacred stories don't hide in books or temples. They thump quietly in your chest. They wake you when you're trying to sleep. They remind you that even in stillness, there's motion. Even in silence, there's rhythm. And maybe, just maybe, your heartbeat is your first language. A story you've been telling since before you had words. You follow the sound of drums again, their rhythm softer now, like distant thunder, and find yourself standing where warriors once trained not for conquest, but for capture. This is the paradox that slips past modern eyes. The Aztec warrior's greatest triumph wasn't to kill his enemy, but to seize him alive. You walk slowly through a training courtyard littered with carvings of eagles and jaguars, those symbols of ferocity. But here, ferocity had a rule. The warriors were trained not just in combat, but in restraint, because a dead enemy was useless. His heart stopped beating, his fire extinguished, but a living one, oh, he was priceless. His pulse, his breath, his heat, they were gifts for the gods. And so battles became harvests, not to erase your enemy, but to reap him. They called them Xochiaoyatl flower wars, a term so gentle, it seems like a mistranslation. But that's what they were, orchestrated conflicts, agreed upon in advance, not to win territory, but to win hearts. Literally, opposing sides would meet, fully armed, but with the shared understanding that this was theater. Sacred, bloody theater. The objective was not annihilation, it was tribute. Prisoners would be taken back to the capital, washed, dressed in fine garments, and prepared as honored offerings. The battlefield, then, was not the end, it was the beginning. Historians still debate the exact nature of these wars, how symbolic they were, how much political manipulation was involved. But the surviving codices leave no doubt that these were not mindless slaughters. They were rituals of procurement. You can almost see it now. The dawn mist curling over the valley floor, rows of brightly clad warriors advancing not with fury, but precision. They shout praises to their gods, not curses at their enemies. When they engage, it's fierce but measured every strike, calculated to disarm, to entangle, to pull down without killing. The warrior who captures the most lives becomes the most honored, not the one who slaughters. And when the battle ends, the air doesn't fill with mourning, but with music. There's pride in return. There's pride in what has been caught. It's hard to imagine now, This inversion of everything we think war means. But for the Aztecs, the captured heart was a victory more sacred than gold. You wander into a side chamber lined with clay models of captives, arms bound but faces serene. That's another thing. The captured were not shown screaming. They were not humiliated. They were elevated. Because to be chosen as a sacrifice was not an insult. It was confirmation that you were strong, beautiful, worthy. The more impressive the prisoner, the more favor he would bring the city. And so the captured warrior was often treated like royalty in the days before his offering. Fed well, sung to, draped in feathers and jade. Sometimes, his family was allowed to attend the ceremony. It was not a punishment. It was a promotion. This flips everything you thought you knew about human fear. Imagine knowing that defeat meant not disgrace, but transcendence. That your heart would be taken not in cruelty, but in reverence. You'd be walked up the temple steps as a vessel, not a victim. And the gods, if they were watching, would see not a loser, but a light. A flicker of divinity returning to the source. The Aztecs believed the heart retained its memory, its fire, even after death. And so your death, in this context, wasn't an ending. It was your final, most important act. Yet there were limits. Not all prisoners were suitable. Those who showed cowardice, who wept, who begged these hearts were considered weak, polluted. The gods wanted steady rhythm, clean fire. That's why, before the ritual, the captives underwent preparation, fasted, bathed, given ceremonial names, because the quality of your offering mattered. A spoiled sacrifice could offend the gods, could bring drought, could dull the sun, and so the prisoner and priest both carried enormous pressure. The moment had to be pure. It had to feel right. This is where the psychological weight of Aztec belief is hardest to shake. It wasn't just about obedience, it was about harmony. You had to tune yourself to the cosmos, like an instrument, like a drum. That's why the captives danced. Yes, even they. On the morning of the sacrifice, it wasn't uncommon for the chosen to participate in ritual dance, moving in circles, arms lifted, legs steady, not to celebrate, not to resist, but to attune. The rhythm was important. It was believed that the dance aligned your yolitl, your heart, with the heart of the world, that if you died while your rhythm matched the divine, your essence would rise cleanly, like a feather caught in wind. And so you danced, and maybe, in that movement, you forgot to be afraid. Even the audience danced, not in joy, not in mockery, but in resonance, because your rhythm, your pulse, mattered too. Everyone became part of the offering. The city breathed together. Some even claimed that when a great warrior was sacrificed, the earth shook slightly, not from tremors, but from harmony, the world recognizing itself in motion. Historians, of course, are skeptical. But maybe that's the point. You can't study faith with equations. You have to feel what it was like to wake up every day and know the sky required something. That if you didn't help feed it, you were stealing warmth. That sacrifice was not an event, it was maintenance. Like sweeping your house, like lighting a candle. And here's the quiet irony that lingers as you walk the courtyard's edge. These so-called flower wars were, in some strange way, more restrained than many modern conflicts. They had rules. They had meaning. The objective was balance, not extermination. And while the Aztecs certainly waged brutal real wars too, this subset, these choreographed encounters were different. They were offerings in motion. A battlefield turned into an altar, a spear into a flute, a capture into a prayer. You stop at a crumbling platform and see it a mural, faint but still visible. Warriors holding their captured foes not with hatred, but with reverence. The heart, again, painted at the center, always the heart. You start to feel like you've seen it in every shadow, every carved stone, every dream. Maybe that's the secret the Aztecs knew, that the heart isn't just an organ or a symbol, it's a mirror. It reflects how people understand value, what they're willing to give, what they're willing to take. And in that heartbeat, whether on a battlefield or an altar, you glimpse the soul of a civilization. Now, as twilight deepens and your breath evens, you begin to feel a strange softness toward all of it. Not approval, not agreement, but understanding. That, in a world built on rhythm and reciprocity, giving your heart wasn't insanity, it was logic. It was love. It was loyalty to something larger than the self. And whether we call it sun or system, God or gravity, that longing still pulses in us, to be part of the beat, to offer what moves us most, to be, for just a moment, the reason something greater keeps rising. You wander farther, following the whisper of wind through ruined archways, and there you find a structure that doesn't look like a temple or a training ground. It's smaller, quieter, tucked behind crumbling walls smoothed by time, but inside, etched faintly along the doorframe, is a glyph for child. And then the air shifts. You weren't expecting this part. You knew about warriors, about gods and blades and hearts lifted to the sky, but not this, not the children. You step into the chamber, and the stone seems to absorb sound, as if, even centuries later, the walls remember what was asked here. You begin to understand a deeper layer of Aztec belief that some children were not just born, they were chosen, and they were raised not for life, but for offering. It begins softly. A drought, a failed harvest, cracked soil, thin rains, people watching the clouds as though willing them into tears. And when the sky refuses to open, the people do. They turn to the rituals they've always known, to the gods who once gave them water, and to Tlaloc, the rain-bringer, who, according to their beliefs, doesn't want rage or war. He wants innocence. He wants the hearts of those closest to the beginning of life, not to punish, but to cleanse. And so, families, yes, sometimes even willingly offered their children, not in cruelty, but in a belief that their child could save the entire city. You feel the air thicken with that strange logic, that heartbreaking paradox, that to love your child might mean giving them. Some children were born into the cult of Tlaloc, raised within temple precincts, nurtured like flowers for a fate they could not question. Dressed in blue, adorned with water lilies, they were paraded before ceremonies, not hidden, because their offering was seen not as tragedy, but as purity. Their tears were believed to call the clouds, and if they cried before sacrifice, it was a good omen. Priests even encouraged it, not by cruelty, but by telling them stories, singing songs of longing and sky, not to frighten them, but to coax the rain. Historians still argue whether these rituals were widespread or confined to specific seasons and crises. Some records are contradictory, others are clear. The most cited references come from post-conquest documents, filtered through foreign eyes, which means everything is suspect, blurred by bias. But pottery, murals, and codices from within the culture confirm that children were, in some contexts, considered powerful conduits between gods and earth. The smaller the heart, the louder its echo. You sit on a cracked stone bench, and you realize how foreign this thinking is to us, and how powerful. In our world, children are protected, shielded, adored. But in theirs, children were light, too precious to keep for oneself, and so they were sent upward. It wasn't done in secret. There were processions, songs. Whole neighborhoods turned out to witness. Offerings were often made near springs, lakes, or mountaintops, places where Tlaloc was believed to listen best. Some children were carried up volcanoes. Others were taken to special rain temples, carved into cliffs, and the journey itself was part of the offering. The steps mattered, the rituals were exact, the songs had to be in order, the clothing had to be clean, because even a child's heart could be rejected by the gods if the ceremony wasn't correct. The divine, after all, was meticulous. It's here you begin to glimpse the chilling reverence that surrounded these acts. They weren't rushed, they weren't done out of panic or anger. They were thoughtful, slow, built on the belief that the gods, like the earth, must be fed, but gently, tenderly. The priests were not executioners. They were caretakers, midwives of passage, and they believed that by guiding a child into the next world, they were completing a cycle, not cutting it short. There's even a term for where these souls went. Tlalocan, a paradise of endless springtime, flowers, and laughter. The Aztecs believed that children sacrificed to the rain, God bypassed the trials of the underworld. They were not judged. They were welcomed. That doesn't make it easier to process. Your modern mind resists, but you stay with the thought. You try to feel the sincerity behind it. Imagine the trust it would take to believe that your child's life wasn't ending, but blooming into something higher, that their little heartbeat could soften the skies, green the earth, and save thousands. It's not a justification. It's a framework, and it ran deep, deep enough to shape decisions, names, architecture. Some homes had rain shrines at the door, with spaces where a child's offering could be symbolically rehearsed through dolls and chants. Families would sing songs to the rain as they bathed their children, reminding them gently that the gods were always listening. And still, not all offerings were literal. In years when hardship wasn't dire, symbolic gestures were made, clay figures, maize dolls, hearts made of fruit and honey, but everyone knew the difference. A clay heart did not pulse, a doll could not cry, and Tlaloc was a god of sounds as much as blood. The tears of children were said to water the clouds directly, their voices small, clear were believed to echo in the chambers of sky, and so, on the rarest, most sacred days, real children were chosen, and their gift was not framed as horror, but as salvation. You walk out of the chamber and into the open again, feeling the warm stone beneath your feet and the sun dipping behind the hills. You understand now that the Aztecs didn't draw clear lines between joy and grief, love and offering. Everything was interwoven. To love something, you had to be ready to let it go, and the heart, in all its innocence or power, was the bridge. Always the bridge, not just between people and gods, but between this world and the next. The Aztecs didn't hide this truth from their children. They sang it to them. They folded it into lullabies, into games, into dances. The heart was not a secret, it was a story. And that's what stays with you as night approaches. The realization that for the Aztecs, every heart was destined to rise, some by age, some by sacrifice, some in song, but all would eventually leave the body and become part of the sky. Even now, lying in bed, your pulse quiet in the dark, you might feel a softness behind your ribs, not fear, but recognition. That small, steady beat inside you is ancient. It has been carried by children and warriors, dancers and dreamers, through centuries of belief, and maybe it's not just yours. Maybe it's borrowed, for a while. Maybe it's a story still being told. You walk now into the deeper shadows of the old city, where columns rise like petrified trees and stone steps seem to grow out of the earth itself. This is the realm of the night gods, the boundary between what is offered and what is taken. You've seen the hearts given in rhythm and faith, lifted to the dawn, to the rain, to the stars, but now you come to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, and here the heart is not a gift, it is a demand. The god of obsidian and illusion, of jaguars and nighttime wind, didn't wait for the willing. His rituals were not bright with flower garlands or hopeful tears. They were darker, older, more unpredictable. If Huitzilopochtli was the sun's hunger and Tlaloc was the sky's thirst, then Tezcatlipoca was the one who asked for your heart to stop while it was still telling the truth. He wanted motion, not memory, and that meant your heart had to be taken while it was still you. You step into a half-collapsed chamber and catch a glimpse of polished obsidian in the wall, once a mirror used in ceremonies. In its dark surface, you see yourself reflected strangely, elongated, distorted, blinking under the flicker of imagined torchlight. This was not a mirror for vanity. This was where warriors looked before their final rite. Tezcatlipoca was not a god of comfort. He was a god of confrontation. He showed you not what you hoped to be, but what you had become. And when your heart was offered to him, it had to be done in that moment of recognition, before regret, before explanation. That's why his ceremonies were held at night, when the world was less clear, and the heartbeat just a little harder in the chest. He was the god who asked, "Are you ready to be seen?" The chosen sacrifice in these rites wasn't always captured or condemned. Sometimes, they were selected for their excellence. Strong bodies, bright minds, perfect dancers. A year before the ceremony, they were dressed in fine clothing, housed among the priests, fed sweet foods, praised, adored, but not out of kindness. It was preparation, because Tezcatlipoca wanted the best. His demand wasn't for shame. It was for peak vitality, for fullness. And so, the most beautiful were chosen, not because they were expendable, but because they were complete. As the months passed, the chosen one became a living icon, a kind of temporary god among men. He would walk the streets, playing music, smiling, carrying flowers. People bowed as he passed. He was not avoided, he was celebrated. But beneath that celebration was the quiet knowledge that this life had a deadline, a specific day, a specific hour, when the music would stop, when the body would lie still, and yet the chosen did not run. Most of them walked calmly to their fate, because they believed something that modern ears have trouble holding, that the climax of a life was not what you achieved, but what you offered, that the best version of you was the one you gave away. The final ceremony was elaborate. The sacrifice would climb the temple steps not in silence, but accompanied by flutes and drums. His body painted, his arms outstretched, 4 priests waited north, south, east, and west, representing the directions of the world. Tezcatlipoca stood at the center of this cross, and the sacrifice's heart, it was said, had to match the beat of the earth at that moment. If it did, the sky would remain whole. If it didn't, well, that's why there were 4 priests, just in case. Historians still argue whether these annual offerings were purely symbolic, or if they occurred with a scale and spectacle described in post-conquest records. Some claim the Spaniards exaggerated the brutality to justify their conquests. Others point to archaeological evidence, altars, bones, carvings that confirm a system too intricate to be fictional. What is certain is that the idea of living godhood tied to sacrifice existed, and that belief itself shaped behavior, even if only a few were ever offered in this way. The knowledge that it could be you, that your beauty, your talent, your joy could one day be required, created a society where nothing was truly yours, not even your heart. There's a story told of a chosen sacrifice who, on the final day, broke the flute he'd been given and refused to walk. The priest tried to coax him, to reassure him, but he stayed curled in the temple garden, staring at the obsidian mirror, whispering, "It lied. It showed me peace. Whether that tale is true or not doesn't matter. It lingered. It became part of the myth, because Tezcatlipoca was not just a god of mirrors. He was the god of disillusion. He showed you what you wanted to believe, and then asked if you were still brave enough to give your heart once you realized it wasn't true. And that's the sharpness at the edge of this tradition. You weren't dying for glory. You weren't dying to save others. You were dying because your essence had ripened, because your heart had reached its crescendo, and Tezcatlipoca wanted the last beat to come before decay set in, like plucking fruit at peak sweetness. No rot, no doubt, just the clean handover of a heart still burning. In some ceremonies, the heart was not lifted to the sky, but placed directly onto an obsidian plate, so the god could see himself in the blood. Because, to the Aztecs, your heart reflected not just your soul, but the divine itself, the gods. In some myths, were blind unless shown themselves through human offering. The heart, then, was not a gift. It was a mirror that pulsed, that throbbed, that whispered, "Here I am." And once the god saw himself, he could act, he could guide, he could restrain his fury. So when you offered your heart to Tezcatlipoca, you weren't just feeding him, you were reminding him of who he was. You lean against a warm wall, your fingers grazing the remnants of a carved jaguar, the symbol of night, of stealth, of power, and you realize how different this feels from the earlier stories. There's no rain here, no flowers, no laughter, only awareness, the hum of knowing you can't hide from what pulses inside your chest, that your heart, however quiet, is always speaking, and someone or something might be listening. As the stars begin to flicker into view overhead, you feel your own heartbeat slow, soften, and you wonder, just for a second, if it has anything left to report. If Tezcatlipoca were to peer into it now, would he see a reflection clear enough to be satisfied? Or would he turn away, muttering, "Not yet"? And somehow, in that ambiguity, there is peace, because the heartbeat, as the Aztecs knew, was never about certainty. It was about motion. It was about now. And right now, in this gentle moment between breath and sleep, your heart is still yours, still warm, still waiting. You wake inside a dream of stone, where the city seems not built, but grown, where temples rise like jagged teeth from the earth, and everything points upward, as if even architecture is offering its heart to the gods. You drift past columns and doorways, through hushed courtyards where once music echoed, and you find yourself wondering, how did they do it? Not just the rituals, the thinking, the enduring belief that to take a life, to open a chest and lift a heart to the sky, was not savagery but symmetry. That balance required blood. That survival meant sacrifice. And yet, even in this deeply structured system of belief, there were adaptations, variations, times when, for reasons either political, spiritual, or seasonal, the Aztecs turned not to bodies but to symbols. And so you arrive now at the most curious chapter, the rituals of substitute hearts. You enter what seems like a kitchen, but ceremonial. The air smells faintly of amaranth and honey. On the table lies a mold roughly the size of a human heart. Bowls of flour, seeds, water, and red pigment sit nearby. And here's where something surprising happened. In times when war was sparse, when captives were few, or when festivals outpaced supply, the Aztecs offered figurative hearts, hand-shaped dough forms, crafted with reverence, baked or dried, painted, and burned. These weren't lazy stand-ins. They were treated with care, sung over, blessed, carried through processions. Because the gods were not always literal, they listened to intention, and the substitute heart, if created with the right ritual, by hands tuned to devotion, could whisper nearly as loudly as flesh. The most common material was amaranth seed flour, bound with water or honey. Sometimes blood was added, animal or human, depending on availability. The resulting paste was pressed into molds or hand-formed, then dried in the sun. Eyes might be painted on, symbols etched. Some were filled with corn or colored stones, others wrapped in feathers or flowers. During grand ceremonies, hundreds of these symbolic hearts would be presented, stacked on stone slabs or buried in fields, intended to fertilize the earth in gesture if not in gore. It was a compromise, but not a cowardly one, because every element, the shape, the color, the breath given as it was formed, carried meaning. The gods were offered not just the form, but the feeling. You stand now at the edge of a sunlit square, imagining what it would look like: a line of priests walking with baskets of dough hearts, children scattering petals ahead of them, drummers softly keeping time. The people watching knew these were not real sacrifices, and yet they wept. They sang, because the ritual still worked, or at least they believed it did. Historians debate this, how the people viewed symbolic offerings versus literal ones. Did they see them as equally sacred or as placeholders? One scholar writes that the gods, when full, accept shadows, implying that substitutes were permitted only when prior offerings had been sufficient. Another theory is more mystical, that these dough hearts were not surrogates, but echoes of earlier deaths, reminding the gods of their ongoing contract. Even more curious is that these hearts were sometimes eaten. During the festival of Huitzilopochtli, amaranth hearts might be blessed, broken apart, and distributed to the people, who would consume them slowly, reverently, like communion. Your modern brain hesitates here, but in that context, the act was not morbid. It was reciprocal. You offered a part of yourself to the gods, and the gods gave part of themselves back. The cycle continued. Nothing wasted. Everything turned. It echoes still in the words Tanali and Yolotl, the heat and motion of life, shared and returned. You pass now through a narrow hallway where murals depict hearts not as bleeding objects, but as flowers. Always flowers, open, expanding. The term to sacrifice in Nahuatl, Nextlahualizli, literally means to repay a debt. The heart, then, was a payment. Whether shaped from dough or carved from ribcage, it settled the cosmic balance sheet, and the Aztecs were accountants of the sacred. They kept track, calendars etched with blood moons and eclipse warnings, markets that closed during holy weeks, agricultural cycles aligned to sacrifice dates, Nothing left to chance. Even these substitute hearts had their place in the grand ledger. There's something unexpectedly tender in this part of the story. A civilization so associated with violence, with blood on the steps, with screaming stone altars, and yet here, you see hands forming soft shapes, baking, decorating, singing as they work. A priest whispering prayers into a heart made of seeds, a child pressing flowers into its side, a mother drawing breath as she sets it gently onto the fire. These moments were no less sacred for lacking pain, because the belief remained the same: the gods must see the motion of life, and the shape of a heart offered with love, with humility, could be enough. You sit on a cool stone bench and close your eyes, imagining the weight of one of these symbolic hearts in your palm. It's light, dry, fragile, but it carries meaning. The gods might accept it, might understand that sometimes humans run out of blood but not reverence, that even when fear or famine or peace prevents a real offering, the gesture still matters, that a life can be honored without being ended. This was the Aztecs' hidden flexibility, their ability to adapt the ritual without abandoning the belief. Sometimes, these substitute hearts were destroyed in fire, sometimes buried with seeds, meant to decompose and feed the soil. Other times they were set afloat in rivers, or placed atop small shrines in cornfields, facing the sunrise. Each act had its own logic, its own symbolism: a heart in fire purification, a heart in earth fertility, a heart in water transmission. Each one a message, and you begin to realize that, to the Aztecs, symbolism wasn't lesser than literalness. It was another layer, another beat in the rhythm of devotion. You rise slowly, the late afternoon light angling through broken lintels and scattering golden dust across the stone floor, and you feel a strange comfort in this, that the ritual could be soft, that the gods, for all their appetite, could accept symbols, that a civilization so defined by bloodletting could also craft offerings with song and flower and firelight. You breathe out slowly, your heart steady, and realize that maybe the Aztecs weren't always trying to appease their gods through terror. Maybe they were also trying to understand them, to speak in gesture, to say, "This is what I feel. This is what I can give." And perhaps we do the same, not with altars or obsidian, but with what we shape: letters, prayers, art, apologies, all of it symbolic, all of it our way of offering what matters most from within us, a kind of dough heart, soft and crumbling, but given sincerely. And maybe that sincerity is enough to move something larger than ourselves, to keep the light coming, to keep the sky listening. You follow a winding path now that bends away from the main temples, past remnants of walls too broken to speak clearly, until you reach a raised platform, circular and low, where the stones still hold faint traces of red pigment. This was no grand altar, no towering ziggurat. It's simpler, quieter, and older. You step closer, and your breath catches slightly as you notice the shallow depression at its center. Not large enough for a person, but exactly shaped to cradle something small and round. And in that moment, it clicks. This is where the sky and the soil met, not for spectacle, but for necessity. Because the Aztecs didn't just offer hearts upward, they also pressed them downward. And now you arrive at one of the strangest, most haunting rituals of all the planting of hearts. Here, sacrifice wasn't about display. It was about function. When a heart was buried rather than lifted, it wasn't hidden, it was seated. The Aztecs believed blood carried Tenali life heat, soul energy, divine fire, and where better to send that energy than into the earth that fed them crops? After all, our gods too. Maize wasn't a food, it was a deity. And like all gods, it had to be woken. So when harvest failed or seeds rotted, the solution wasn't new tools or better timing. It was old magic. They would find a chosen heart, usually that of a captured warrior, occasionally even a volunteer, and bury it at the edge of the field. Not deep, just beneath the topsoil, where roots could reach it. Then they'd plant around it, and they would wait. You feel the sun warm your neck as you stand near that burial spot. And you think of it not as a grave, but as a heartbeat sleeping in the dirt. The Aztecs imagined it that way too, that the heart didn't stop pulsing immediately, that for a few moments, maybe even longer, it continued its rhythm underground, like a drum too quiet to hear, summoning the rain, speaking to the worms, warming the seeds. There are glyphs that show this image, a stylized heart, wrapped in maize roots, glowing faintly. Scholars debate the literalness of it, but the symbolism is unambiguous. The idea was simple: to feed the earth, give it your best fire, and the heart was your highest flame. Not all planted hearts were buried in fields. Some were pressed beneath a new construction, foundations of temples, homes, ball courts, even market stalls. When a new structure was raised, the Aztecs often blessed the site by embedding a heart in its foundation. They didn't see this as macabre, it was seen as strengthening the structure with sacred force. A house built on a heart would stand longer. A temple with a warrior's pulse beneath it would echo clearer. One codex shows a scene where a family, preparing to build a home, hosts a private offering. A young man, honored for bravery in a recent campaign, is chosen. There is weeping, yes, but also singing. The sacrifice is performed with care. His heart is buried beneath the future hearth. The fire above will now always be fed by the fire below. This ritual wasn't limited to elites. Even commoners, when they could not afford such a ceremony, might create symbolic hearts again of dough or obsidian, and bury them with quiet prayers. You can picture it: a mother kneeling beside a shallow pit, pressing a clay heart wrapped in corn husks into the ground, whispering words to Tonakatakutli, god of sustenance. This wasn't violence. This was continuity. And you realize now how comprehensive the Aztec worldview was. The heart wasn't just central to sacrifice, it was central to structure. Everything was built upon it, literally and spiritually. A world shaped like a beating chest. You step away from the platform and walk toward the edge of what once was a field. The outlines are faint now, just impressions in the dust. But you can imagine rows of maize rising from this earth, and you wonder how many of those plants drank from the place where a heart once lay. What did the Aztecs taste when they chewed that corn? Not guilt, not sorrow, but pride, participation. The belief that nourishment wasn't passive, it was relational. That the earth responded best not to force, but to devotion. And the heart, warm and wordless, was the highest form of that. The modern mind struggles here. We look at these rituals and see superstition, desperation. But when you pause, when you feel the sun on your skin and your own pulse in your chest, you start to understand the logic. The Aztecs weren't obsessed with death. They were obsessed with motion, continuity, flow, the transfer of heat and rhythm from one form to another. Death wasn't an end. It was a pivot, a change in direction, a redirection of energy. The heart didn't die, it moved. From chest to soil, from soil to stalk, from stalk to mouth, from mouth to blood, and back again. There's even a fragment of a poem recorded in colonial text but believed to be older that says, "We eat the breath of those before us." That line stays with you, the breath of those before us. The idea that what you consume is not just matter, but memory. That every bite carries a trace of someone who gave. You think of this next time you eat something warm, maybe you already feel it, without knowing why. That gentle humility when chewing something that tastes like it took time, like it came from devotion. That's not sentimentality, that's transmission. And so, when the Aztecs planted hearts, they weren't desecrating the dead, they were investing them, charging the world with life. This is the part that isn't told in most textbooks: the quiet offerings, the buried pulses, the homes with sacred hearths. But it matters, because it shows that sacrifice wasn't always a spectacle. Sometimes it was private, sometimes it was whispered, sometimes it was done by candlelight, with no witnesses but the wind. You return now to the platform and sit down slowly, letting the silence settle in. You place your hand on the warm stone. Nothing moves, and yet you know deep beneath, something once did. A heart, maybe several, beating, cooling, becoming something else. And you realize that this story isn't about violence or cruelty, it's about transformation. The Aztecs gave what was most alive to what needed life, not as punishment, but as participation. They wanted the world to keep moving, and they believed the best way to do that was to give it something that already knew how to move. And maybe, in your own quiet way, you do the same. You give your time, your effort, your attention, pieces of yourself planted into your work, your relationships, your routines, not for applause, but for continuity, for contribution, for meaning. Maybe the modern heart is not lifted or buried, but it is still given, one beat at a time, one gesture at a time, one offering at a time. And maybe, just maybe, the world grows a little more alive because of it. You walk now beneath a corridor of arching stone, the walls pressed tight with carvings so dense they almost blur serpents curling around flames, hands held out with open palms, and always that same image, a heart between fingers, sometimes radiating lines, sometimes encircled by feathers, sometimes pierced but never weeping. It strikes you then that the Aztecs didn't hide the act of offering. They etched it into everything. And as your fingers trace a groove worn deep from centuries of weather, you begin to see an expression not of pain but of serenity. The face of the figure offering their own heart is calm, almost peaceful, and you remember something strange you read once, that those brought to sacrifice were expected to smile, not pretend, not grimace, but to meet death with poise, because the expression you wore in your final moment reflected how your heart would be received. If you were afraid, the heart was said to shrink. If you were angry, it would twist. But if you were still steady, the gods could lift it cleanly, like a breath. It wasn't theater, it was belief. You feel that now. The Aztecs thought your interior world shaped your offering, that the quality of your death was part of the gift, and that calm was not weakness, it was power. To walk toward your own sacrifice with grace meant you had learned how to live in rhythm with the divine. So the smile was not submission, it was alignment. And this smile, this quiet readiness, was cultivated over time. Priests, families, entire communities would prepare the chosen, not to resist, but to be radiant, to make the offering complete. Even the architecture reinforced it. Temple steps were not merely functional, they were symbolic. A final ascent, an emergence. You walked up not to be taken, but to become visible. Imagine the scene: sunrise washing the eastern horizon, drums echoing in slow, syncopated bursts, and a figure ascending, draped in feathers, body painted in celestial patterns, each step deliberate. The crowd is silent, not in fear, but in awe, because this is not a death, this is a revelation. And at the top, as the figure kneels, they look upward and they smile, not because they want to, but because they must. It is the last gesture of strength, the final way to say, I am still mine. There's an unsettling beauty in that. The idea that the most powerful expression of control is not in surviving, but in choosing how you're seen in your final breath. That your body could be conquered, but not your posture, not your face, even the gods. It was believed, responded to this. A serene sacrifice was more effective. The sky opened faster, the sun rose brighter, crops responded quicker, because the energy carried in a calm heart was stronger, undiluted, no fear, no anger, just rhythm. Historians still debate this, whether the smile was truly natural or trained, whether it was spiritual or social pressure. There are accounts many from post-conquest scribes describing victims singing as they climbed the stairs. Others say they danced, and some more grim suggest drugging or coercion. But the Aztecs themselves left images not of struggle, but of surrender, not as weakness, but as elegance. And this idea, this poise, permeated their art, their poetry, their daily life. One surviving line reads, "Die not as a stone, die as a flower, opening." That phrase returns again and again in your mind, as if whispered between the heartbeat of the ruins. You pass a side altar now, where a smooth obsidian basin still rests. This is where the heart would be placed for display, after removal, not hidden, not disposed of, but shown, elevated, because the heart, once lifted, became communal. It was no longer yours. It belonged to the world. Some hearts were cast into sacred fires, others fed to statues of the gods. A few were taken up in dance, literally carried in open palms as music rose. The heart wasn't just proof of death, it was proof of devotion, a token, a promise kept, and its motion even after extraction mattered. There are glyphs of priests holding hearts up to the sun, waiting for a sign, a flash of light, a sudden wind, an animal cry. These signs were interpreted as divine approval. If none came, the ritual might repeat, another sacrifice, another heart, until the gods answered. And that's the part that stings. Even now, the uncertainty that your offering, no matter how sincere, might not be accepted. That, even in purity, you could be met with silence. But they offered anyway, again and again, because silence didn't mean no. It meant not yet. And you think about that, the persistence of belief, the endurance of ritual, not because it was easy, but because it gave meaning. In a world of floods and famine, conquest and collapse, the act of steady offering of showing up with your best rhythm was itself a kind of resistance, a kind of hope. And maybe that's what the smile really was. Not a mask, not denial, but a decision to face uncertainty with grace. You move again. Your footsteps light on the uneven stone and pass a mural showing a sequence rarely depicted, not the moment of sacrifice, but the hours before. The figure sits surrounded by family, hands touching his shoulders, his chest, his face, not mourning, not pleading, just being together, the calm before the offering. And you feel a sudden shift in your understanding. The ritual didn't begin at the altar. It began with community, with preparation, with collective breath. You weren't offered alone. You were carried by the lives around you, a shared rhythm. Some stories even tell of those who requested sacrifice not out of despair, but of purpose. People who believed their moment had come, who felt a fire in their chest and knew it was time to give it. These are the fringe accounts, the ones less often repeated, but they persist because they hint at something deeper, that the Aztecs didn't just fear their gods. They trusted them, enough to smile when letting go, enough to believe the gods would catch the rhythm and use it well. You sit now beneath a tree growing where a shrine once stood. Its roots likely touch bones. Its fruit, when it blossoms, falls near where hearts once rested. You imagine that fruit being eaten centuries ago, someone biting into sweetness, never knowing what slept beneath. And perhaps that too is part of the cycle, that the smile given before death becomes a flavor, a shadow, a warmth passed quietly through time, no monument, just a trace. And tonight, as your own breath slows, your muscles softening into the pull of sleep, you might feel a smile on your face too, not of joy, not of fear, but of recognition, that you, too, carry a rhythm, that you, too, will one day offer something, your time, your presence, your final gesture, and maybe, just maybe, when that moment comes, you'll know how to smile with your whole chest. You wander into the outskirts now, where the ceremonial center gives way to the quieter districts, the ones where people lived, cooked, sang, and swept the dust from their doorways each morning. It's easy to forget that beyond the altars and obsidian knives, there were markets, gardens, clay ovens, and laughter. Life didn't pause for sacrifice. It grew around it, pulsed alongside it, and here, in this slower corner of the city, you begin to understand how deeply the heart ritual seeped into everyday life, not just as theology or politics, but as rhythm. The Aztecs didn't think of offering the heart as a rare event. It was a pulse woven into the fabric of their days. Every act, every word, carried an echo of it. Even here, where children played with reed toys and women shaped tortillas with humming songs, you can feel it. The heart wasn't just what ended your life. It was what animated everything within it. You pause at the edge of a garden terrace, overgrown now, but once tended, the irrigation canal still faintly visible, and beside them, stones arranged in a curious pattern, 4 small circles around a central flat slab. And you realize this wasn't just a garden. It was a domestic altar, one used not for grand public sacrifice, but for offerings of thanks. Perhaps for a healthy child, a safe return from war, the first rainfall. In these spaces, the heart was honored not through removal, but through reflection. Family members would gather, speak prayers aloud, and placed symbolic hearts, small clay tokens, or maze figurines on the central stone. They didn't expect gods to descend in fire. They just hoped the world would continue turning kindly, that the rhythm of the home would stay in tune with the wider rhythm of the universe. And it wasn't just special occasions. The heart found its way into language, into metaphors, into cooking. A dish made with care was said to be prepared with heart. A child who was thoughtful was said to have a heart that listens. Anger was called a trembling heart, while forgiveness was a cooled heart. The weather was spoken of in emotional terms, too. A gentle breeze meant the sky had a calm heart. A storm was a sign the heavens were agitated. And so, even the wind felt like breath. Even the sun seemed to beat. The entire world was animate, responsive, alive. There's a small grinding stone near one doorway, still smooth from decades of use, and it makes you think, was it used for corn, or for seeds in sacred dough? Was a mother here grinding the ingredients for a symbolic heart? Was a child watching, learning the ritual not from sermons but from repetition? This is how traditions endure, not in drama, but in rhythm. In the hum of daily life, the heart wasn't kept sacred by being hidden. It was kept sacred by being known, by being used as a compass for how to live. One old song fragment survives, likely sung by women during festival preparation. Its translation reads, "In the middle of the chest, we carry the drum. If it stops, all the songs fall. There's no mention of blood, no mention of gods, just music. Just the understanding that the heartbeat underlies everything." You feel that now, standing under the late sun, your own pulse, slow, steady, not dramatic, but faithful. The kind of rhythm that doesn't ask for attention, but provides structure to the whole day. Maybe this is what the Aztecs meant. Ultimately, that the heart's greatest power wasn't in its ending, but in its ongoingness, its quiet insistence, its willingness to keep returning. And that's why the rituals around the heart extended not just to humans, but to animals, to fire, even to architecture. When a fire was first lit in a home, the Aztecs performed a small ceremony, touching a clay heart to the embers, whispering a prayer that the warmth would remain balanced, not too fierce, not too weak. Temples were designed with central chambers that echoed a single footstep like a heartbeat. Traders placed heart-shaped stones in their pouches before long journeys. Farmers wore pendants carved with hearts not for show, but as reminders of their rhythm. And the warriors spoke of their chests as drums for the gods. Even in battle, they listened for that beat, not to survive, but to be sure they were still aligned with purpose. Historians often overlook this part, the tenderness in the culture. The way a society so aligned with sacrifice also wove love and care into everything. It's easier to remember the blade than the lullaby, but both existed. The Aztecs didn't just take hearts. They cherished them, honored them, built their world around their sound. And so, when someone's heart was taken on an altar, it wasn't removed from a stranger. It was removed from a member, someone whose heartbeat had already been part of the greater rhythm, someone whose pulse had already been counted in meals, in prayers, in songs. You walk farther now and find a courtyard with a low platform in the center, just high enough for someone to stand and speak. This, scholars believe, was a place for community oratory birth announcements, blessings, poetry. It reminds you that the Aztecs didn't think of sacrifice only as loss. It was also language, a way of expressing something too large for words. When language failed, the body spoke, the heart rose, and the gods, if they were paying attention, would understand. There are stories of people who, upon witnessing a particularly powerful sacrifice, would feel something shift inside them, a fire, a clarity. Some joined priesthoods, some changed their trades, some left gifts at altars. The point was not that they enjoyed the sight. The point was that they recognized something, an alignment, a brief glimpse into what it meant to live fully, so fully that your heartbeat could matter to the sky. The Aztecs didn't glorify death. They glorified meaning, and the heart because it moved without asking, because it kept rhythm no matter what became their emblem for truth. So now, as twilight creeps across this ancient neighborhood, and your own thoughts grow slow, you feel the softness of the ideas settle over you, that perhaps it's not the size of what we offer that matters, but the sincerity that a clay heart placed by a child, a dish stirred with love, a walk taken in silence with someone dear, these things matter. These things count, not in history books, but in whatever unseen ledger the Aztecs believed kept the sun turning. You don't need an altar to make an offering. Sometimes you just need to feel your heartbeat and know it's still steady, still open, still ready. And tonight, as you lie back into whatever version of peace you've made for yourself, your heart will go on doing its quiet work, one beat, then another. Not asking, not waiting, just giving. Like it always has. Like it always will. The light has faded now, and only a faint glow lingers along the stone edges of the ancient walkways. You move more slowly, not from fatigue, but from something else, a kind of reverence that builds quietly, like a hymn without words. You pass beneath the arch of what was once a ceremonial gateway, and your hand runs along the cold surface of carved stone, tracing patterns worn by centuries of fingers before yours. Here, in this narrowing corridor, you feel the weight of memory settle, not the memory of events, but of rhythm. The Aztecs believed the heart remembered not just feelings, but movements. Every beat encoded what you did with your body, your gestures, your hesitations, your courage, and in their theology, when you died, it wasn't your brain that stood judgment. It was your heart, not as metaphor, but as artifact, as evidence. And this heart didn't just travel to the gods. It testified. You pause before a mural, one less elaborate than others, tucked away from the main roots. It shows a figure kneeling beside a priest, chest open not yet by the blade, but by choice. One hand is on the ground. The other is held toward the sky. Above, a jaguar floats, mouth closed, eyes calm. Beneath the figure, a stylized heart glows in a strange red and gold pattern, ringed by something that looks like fire, but also like speech. This is one of the lesser-known beliefs among the Aztecs, that your heart, when released correctly, spoke your final truth, not in words, but in vibration, in tone, and the gods, who couldn't lie and had no need to ask questions, heard it immediately. Your entire life compressed into one final rhythm, a summary, a signature. This idea of the heart as witness is what you feel pulsing through this part of the ruins. It's different from earlier sections, where sacrifice was a shared performance, a public act. Here, it becomes intimate, personal. The heart, as testimony, didn't need an audience. Only the sky, only the gods. And so these smaller altars, these side shrines and hidden corners, weren't for spectacle. They were for confession, for resolution, for truth. The Aztecs believed that some sacrifices weren't meant to feed the sun or stir the rain, but to close a story, to complete something unresolved, perhaps a promise, perhaps a guilt, perhaps a longing carried too long. Historians still debate the scale of these personal sacrifices. Some believe they were symbolic, involving animal hearts or clay representations. Others argue that in rare cases, individuals requested their own offering, not from desperation, but from readiness. These were not outcasts. Often, they were poets, artists, or aged warriors, people whose lives had been full, who had given all they could, and now sought to release the last thing they carried, their rhythm, the final beat, given not out of fear or obligation, but from a desire to harmonize fully with the divine. You walk deeper, and the air becomes heavier. The stones are closer here, more uneven. Moss grows in the cracks. The night wraps tighter, and yet you don't feel dread, only solemnity. This is where hearts were sent not upward, but inward. There are glyphs etched into one wall, barely visible, but scholars interpret them as prayers, short ones, no more than 5 or 6 syllables, likely chanted by the person giving their heart. One translates roughly to, "I return what was never mine." Another, "My motion is yours now." You can imagine the tone soft, deliberate, the voice trembling slightly, not with fear, but with clarity. These weren't cries, they were conclusions, and it makes you wonder, what would your heartbeat say? If it could speak, what truth would it carry forward? If stripped of all your justifications and performance, would it tremble with longing or settle with peace? Would it beat faster at the memory of something left unfinished? Or slow into stillness at the thought of a life sincerely lived? The Aztecs believed that the gods didn't judge in the way humans did. There were no scales, no punishments, only reception. Your heart wasn't weighed, it was heard. And whatever it sang in that final flutter was accepted completely, not praised, not condemned, just known. That belief created a kind of inner responsibility, because if your heart would one day speak for you, it mattered how you live now, not just in terms of honor or law, but in rhythm. Were you living with coherence? Was your pace aligned with purpose? The Aztecs had a word for this Neltalistically, often translated as truth, but closer in meaning to right alignment. A truthful life, in their eyes, wasn't about words or facts. It was about motion that matched essence, your actions resonating with your spirit, your rhythm unbroken. That was truth, and the heart recorded it all. You come upon a shallow pit now, rimmed with worn stones and overgrown with weeds. But this wasn't a place of burning. It was a place of cooling. Some hearts, particularly those offered in nighttime rituals to underworld gods, were not burned or buried immediately. They were cooled, placed in water, or rubbed with earth, so that their final vibrations would settle. The priests believed this gave the heart clarity, like letting music echo one last time before silence. It's a delicate gesture, isn't it, that, even in death, you were given a chance to finish your sentence, to complete your rhythm before stillness took you. There's an old fragment of poetry attributed to a priest of Mictlantecutli, the lord of the underworld. It says, "Do not fear the end. The last beat is only the one that listens." And maybe that's why these corners of the city exist. Places not for the dramatic offering, but for the listening, for the stillness after the beat, the pause that echoes longest. The Aztecs understood that endings were sacred, not because they erased what came before, but because they preserved it, held it gently, allowed it to be heard without interruption. You sit now near the edge of the courtyard, where a low stone bench rests beside a half-broken water basin, and you feel a quiet that is different from sleep, deeper, as if your own heartbeat has softened its urgency and now just wants to be noticed. Not used, not offered, just felt, and in that moment, you realize something quietly stunning. That, for the Aztecs, the heart wasn't only about sacrifice, it was about awareness, presence, connection, and sometimes the most sacred offering was not in giving the heart away, but in listening to it. And so tonight, before you drift fully into sleep, maybe you place a hand gently on your chest, not to count, not to measure, just to acknowledge, to hear what your body has been saying all along, that it has moved for you tirelessly, that it remembers everything, that it carries your rhythm, and that one day, when you no longer have words, it will still speak for you, and maybe that will be enough. You return now to the heart of the temple district, its staircases looming once more like frozen waves of stone, and the quiet that once wrapped these places like a shawl feels deeper now, almost dense. You move with more intention, as if your footsteps should disturb less, as if the air itself is waiting, and this time, you're drawn not upward, but toward one of the lesser-known corners of the complex, a circular platform bordered by serpent heads, its edges scorched, its surface etched in spirals. This was a preparation ground, where before the blade ever touched skin, the body was transformed through ritual, because to the Aztecs, the act of sacrifice began not with death, but with purification. Before your heart could be accepted, you had to become something else, something sacred. The transformation wasn't symbolic, it was total. And so the final days, sometimes even weeks, of a chosen individual's life were shaped not by fear, but by metamorphosis. You enter this circular space and feel a slight vibration through the soles of your feet. It's imagined, of course, but the design of the ground was intentional. When drums were played around it, the vibrations would travel upward into the body. Priests believed these rhythms helped align the inner motion of the sacrifice's heart with the tempo of the cosmos. The sacrifice would fast, bathe daily, and take part in dances that were less performance than attunement. Their body painted anew each day. They were stripped of their old name and given a divine one, sometimes the name of the god they were about to embody. They were no longer simply themselves. They were an incarnation, a vessel. The heart to be offered was no longer personal. It was archetypal. It stood for something larger. You begin to see how thorough this preparation was. The food the chosen ate was carefully measured not just in amount, but in symbolism. Each meal might reflect an element maize for the earth, pulque for the sky, chilies for fire. Their dreams were interpreted by priests, their thoughts questioned, not for moral judgment, but to ensure clarity. The heart had to be in harmony. If the person was agitated or conflicted, the offering could be corrupted. It's strange, isn't it? The idea that emotion could shape the quality of blood. But that's what they believed. That even in death, intention mattered. The gods didn't just receive the organ, they received the music inside it. You pause before a low platform decorated with jaguar skins now worn to shadow, and learn that here, some sacrifices underwent a final rite the night before the offering. They were allowed to speak, not to plead, not to confess, but to affirm what they believed, what they gave, a kind of closing ritual to declare their readiness. These affirmations were sung, often to flutes, and were believed to resonate into the stone, making the offering site more powerful. Some lines survive, translated later by monks or passed orally into villages. My breath is yours now, sky. Or strike when the drum stops, I will not flinch. They weren't prayers, they were promises. It's here that you feel the full weight of Aztec sacrifice shift again from act to art. This wasn't merely death, it was choreography. Everything precise, everything resonant. The steps taken to the altar had to be even. The chants had to match the wind. The obsidian blade was sharpened just so not for cruelty, but for purity. The quicker the incision, the more cleanly the heart could be lifted without damage. A jagged edge could tear, could offend. The gods noticed detail. They listened not only to what was done, but how. And so every movement, every gesture, every second mattered. Historians sometimes marvel at the technical efficiency of Aztec ritual sacrifice, the speed, the low margin of error, the anatomical precision. But the people who performed these acts didn't see themselves as executioners or technicians. They saw themselves as conductors. Their role was to guide the final crescendo of the human rhythm, to lift the heartbeat at its highest note and offer it before it faded. A misstep, a falter, even a misplaced foot on the temple stairs, these could ripple outward, disrupting the sacred symmetry. And so, as strange as it may seem now, many priests trained for years not only in knife work, but in music, poetry, and cosmology. They weren't chosen for coldness, they were chosen for control. You wander to the edge of the altar now, where the surface rises slightly, like a rounded breastbone. This is where the heart would be held aloft, still warm, still twitching, and there, facing the rising sun or moon, depending on the god, the priest would pause, not for effect, but for recognition. This moment, the suspension of the heart between earth and sky, was believed to be the instant of balance, when the sacrifice was complete but not yet consumed, when the rhythm of the heart, now freed, resonated outward into the invisible order of the cosmos. It was said that time held its breath here, that everything paused for just a blink, to acknowledge what had been given. In some cases, if the sacrifice was particularly important, done on a solstice, during an eclipse, or marking the end of a calendrical cycle, the heart might be placed into a carved vessel and held overnight, so its heat would fade slowly. It wasn't about spectacle, it was about duration. A long cooling heart was thought to send messages longer, to speak further, to echo deeper into the divine. Some temples had special rooms, just for this, the warming chambers, small, silent, lined with polished stone. Only a few priests allowed inside. No fire, just the heart, still giving, still speaking. And this is what you begin to understand as you step away from the altar. The night air thick and still that for the Aztecs, offering a heart was not an interruption to life. It was life's culmination, not a deviation, but a fulfillment. To be chosen, to be prepared, to give rhythm at its strongest, it wasn't destruction. It was music. And even now, as your own heart continues its soft drumming behind your ribs, you might feel a faint echo of that rhythm, a reminder that everything you do leaves a trace, that your pace matters, that your presence has a tone. You leave the circle slowly and glance back once more at the platform, now empty but humming with memory. It's not fear you feel, not pity, but a strange tenderness, that a civilization once believed in the holiness of motion so deeply. It shaped every gesture around it, that they gave the best of themselves not when asked, not when punished, but when they felt their fire had reached its fullest burn, and then they offered it with open hands. And maybe, just maybe, that's not so foreign after all. You do the same, in your own quiet ways. You offer your focus, your attention, your care. You build things, you release them. You try to time your efforts not for applause, but for harmony, for completion. And sometimes you pause, heart in hand, and hope the world hears you, just for a moment, just enough to nod back. You walk now beneath the stars, the sky spread wide and low over the silent city, and the moon carved and pale hangs like a single, watching eye. The air has grown cooler, and your footsteps echo slightly now, as if the ground itself remembers the beat. You follow the curve of a stone walkway that leads toward the sacred ball court, an arena not of sport in the modern sense, but of ritual, myth, and metaphor. Here, the game was played not just for entertainment, but for cosmology, for narrative, for balance, and most hauntingly for the possibility of offering the winning team's hearts. That's the part most people stumble over, that the prize for victory was not a trophy, but transcendence. And as strange as it sounds, the Aztecs saw it not as a punishment, but as a privilege. Because in this game, the goal wasn't survival, it was ascension. The court is long and sunken, flanked by stone walls that once rang with the thud of rubber balls and the cries of players mid-stride. You stand on the edge, imagining them now, bare-chested, adorned with feathers and leather, sweat catching moonlight, bodies taut with purpose. They didn't see themselves as athletes. They were warriors acting out the primordial drama, the battle between day and night, life and death, sun and shadow. The ball, symbolic of the sun, had to be kept in motion, always. It could never be still, because stillness was defeat. Stillness was death, and yet, in a twist that modern minds struggle with, death itself was the reward. The mythological roots of the game run deep. In the sacred stories, the twin hero brothers of the underworld defeat the lords of death through skill, trickery, and sacrifice, proving that even in darkness, motion could triumph. The ball game, played in their memory, became more than sport. It became rehearsal. Every match echoed that myth, and every player stepped into the role of cosmic actor. To win meant to embody the hero. To lose meant perhaps another kind of offering, but always, it was the winning team's captain whose heart might be chosen. Why? Because he was aligned, in rhythm, and that rhythm had to be lifted skyward before it faded. Historians argue whether the practice of sacrificing winners was widespread or isolated, whether it was voluntary or ceremonial myth, but even in ambiguity, the idea persisted, and that idea, the notion that victory was not escape, but culmination, shaped how the game was played. It wasn't about dominance, it was about harmony. You had to move as one, to pass, to pivot, to strike in unison. The best teams weren't the strongest, but the most coherent. Their hearts beat in time. Their breath moved together, and when one player soared, when a perfect arc sent the ball through the stone ring high on the wall, it wasn't just a score, it was a sign. The gods had noticed. You move now to the base of the court, standing where players once launched themselves in full dive, bare elbows cracking against stone, chasing that bouncing orb like it carried the world's fate, and in a way, it did, because that ball, made of rubber tapped from sacred trees, was said to contain the sun's energy. It had to move. It had to strike walls, rebound, twist, and fly just like time, just like the heart. It couldn't stop. If it stopped, the game ended. And if the game ended, so did the balance. The whole world, in miniature, played out again and again under open sky. When the match ended, the outcome mattered. The winners might be lifted onto shoulders, garlanded with flowers, praised, but sometimes quietly. They were also watched, not with envy, but with reverence, because their rhythm had been pure, their bodies tuned, and the gods, it was said, paid attention to such alignment. It wasn't uncommon for priests to approach a winning player days later, gently, respectfully, not to summon, but to ask, "Are you ready?" And some said yes, not all, but enough, because for some, the peak of existence was not to grow old and fade, but to end in motion, to end at the moment when your heartbeat had never been truer. You step up onto the narrow terrace where spectators once stood. It's quiet now, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the rhythm of footfalls, the heavy breath, the barked chants of encouragement, the pulse of the crowd mimicking the pulse of the players. Everyone participating, everyone invested. It wasn't sport for the sake of leisure. It was communion. The outcome touched everyone. If the heart of a player was taken after victory, the whole city felt it, not as loss, but as offering. The post-game rituals were private, not public spectacle. The chosen were bathed, fed, and sung to. Their families received honors, their names added to the temple murals. Some accounts even suggest that during the final moments, the player held the ball against his chest, over his heart, so the gods would feel the rhythm through it. Then the blade came not as violence, but as punctuation, a final note struck perfectly in tune. You walk the court's length one more time, this time slower, your hand trailing along the ridged wall. There's a carving partially eroded of a man holding a heart in one hand and a ball in the other. Above him, a spiral sun. It's not a warning. It's not a threat. It's an instruction. Keep the rhythm. Offer the fire while it still burns. You begin to see the heart and the game as the same thing. Not separate symbols, but expressions of the same truth that life is motion. That value lies not in duration, but in alignment. And maybe, just maybe, that idea lingers in you too. In the games you play, the competitions you enter, the moments when your pulse quickens, not in fear, but in focus, when you feel in it, tuned. Those are the moments when you are most alive, and perhaps, in some ancient, quiet way, the Aztecs would say, yes, this is when the gods are watching, not to judge, but to listen, to feel the echo of your heartbeat as it moves in time with your purpose. The stars overhead throb gently now, each one a dot of light, steady in its position, yet burning with untold motion, and beneath them, you feel your own chest rise, fall, rise again. You're not on a stone court. You're in a quiet room, perhaps, or a bed, or a place of rest, but the rhythm remains, your own ball, bouncing inside your ribs, and somewhere, far above or deep within, the gods, whatever they may be, are listening, not for greatness, not for volume, but for rhythm, for the sound that says, I am still moving, I am still aligned, I am still here. You follow a narrow path now, one that winds behind the ball court and dips slightly into a shaded grove where the trees grow thick, and the air holds a kind of suspended silence, as if the forest itself remembers too much. This place wasn't ceremonial, not in the grand sense. There are no steps, no altars, no soaring glyphs etched into walls. But there is something else, a heaviness. And here, beneath the tangled canopy, you come upon a clearing with a low circle of stones and scattered fragments of pottery, beads, and shells. This was a site of remembrance, not of kings or warriors or sun-drenched ritual, but of those whose hearts were taken in solitude, the forgotten, the unnamed, those sacrificed not in fanfare, but in necessity. And suddenly, the scope of it all begins to widen. You realize that not every offering was grand. Some were quiet, some were invisible, and yet the heart, always, was at the center. There are stories, fragments, really that tell of times when the gods demanded more than the state could supply. During famine, During flood, when the calendar warned of misalignment and the omens twisted in the wind, in those moments, the priests did not call for warriors. They called for willingness, and sometimes what came was not strength or beauty, but humility. A baker, a widow, a servant, someone whose name would never be carved into a temple wall, but whose rhythm, whose inner fire, was believed strong enough to count. These individuals were brought here off the main grounds, away from the drums, and offered not with ceremony, but with silence. And the gods, it was said, cherished these hearts most of all, because they came without ambition, without identity, only motion, only rhythm, a clean beat offered in the dark. You step into the circle and feel how uneven the ground is, soft in places, brittle in others. It doesn't feel sacred in the way temples do. It feels familiar, like a field where something meaningful once happened and then was forgotten. But the Aztecs didn't forget. They returned here, laid flowers, burned copal, whispered names no one else knew. This was the part of the ritual that didn't make it into official codices, the part that was personal. The Aztecs knew that some offerings were not about glory. They were about balance. When a drought dragged too long or the omens turned sour, the priests turned to the community, and sometimes the community gave what little it had, a beating heart in a quiet grove, not because it was dramatic, but because it was enough. There is a myth obscure, barely translated, that speaks of a girl whose heart was offered in secret. She had no family, no name that history remembers, but they say her heart beat so clearly, so steadily, that when it was placed upon a stone and left beneath the moon, it echoed into the sky for 7 days. Crops returned, the lake filled again, the air shifted. She was never carved into murals, but her pulse was said to live in the earth beneath the capital. Some believed you could feel it if you walked barefoot near the old market, a rhythm beneath your feet, a heartbeat with no name. This belief that even the smallest life could realign the cosmos is what turned so much of the Aztec worldview upside down. To us, sacrifice implies power, authority, spectacle. But here, in this grove, you begin to understand it differently. Sacrifice wasn't always about display. Sometimes it was about repair. When things broke, not just buildings or systems, but trust, harmony, rhythm, the people responded with motion, not by fighting, but by offering. And the heart, because it held all motion, all memory, all music, was the natural answer. You crouch beside one of the stones and see a shard of pottery half buried in the dirt. It's curved, glazed faintly in red, possibly part of a bowl once used to carry food to an offering, or maybe used to collect tears. The Aztecs didn't discard objects after rituals. They believed each item retained a shadow of what it had witnessed. So bowls, cloths, even sandals used during these quiet offerings were often left nearby, gently covered with soil or ash. A way of saying this, too, gave something. You wonder how many lives small, uncelebrated were given here, not because they had to, but because someone asked, and because saying yes meant believing you mattered. And that's the unsettling grace of this place, that it was made not for the extraordinary, but for the willing, for those who believe their rhythm, even if quiet, could help the world turn. There's no monument, no record, but you begin to feel that maybe in a civilization so attuned to balance, the smallest offerings were the most stabilizing, like a weight placed on the right part of a wheel, a heartbeat that kept everything from spinning apart. There's a term in Nahuatl, tlazot lalisli, often translated as compassion or love, but more literally means the act of cherishing. And you realize, standing here, that this was a place for that, for cherishing, not in the way we do now, with celebration and stories, but with silence, with repetition, with presence. The people who came here didn't announce it. They walked softly. They carried bundles. They returned home quietly. And the gods, it was believed, responded with the same tone. Rain that came without thunder, crops that grew without fanfare, a breeze that arrived at just the right time. This was reciprocity in its most subtle form, an exchange too small to record, but not too small to feel. As you turn to leave, you glance once more at the circle of stones. The moonlight slides across them like water, and for a second, you think you hear something, not a voice, not music, but a rhythm, faint, steady, like a drum buried beneath the roots, like a heartbeat long given, still echoing, and you feel your own pulse answer it, not loudly, not ceremonially, just in time, just in tune. And in that moment, you carry forward the memory not of a name, not of a myth, but of a rhythm once given quietly, and still heard by the world. The path ahead is darker now, less defined, the stones giving way to soil as you descend toward what once lay beyond the ceremonial centers, where the edge of the city blurred into wilderness, and ritual became raw. You follow what might have once been a footpath, overgrown and swallowed by time, until you reach a space that feels ancient in a different way, not sacred through structure, but sacred through absence. No altars, no murals, just a large, flat stone, ringed by scorched earth and broken twigs. And here, you arrive at one of the most unsettling, least understood corners of Aztec ritual, the preservation of hearts. Because not every offering ended with the heart disappearing into fire or soil. Some hearts were kept, held, stored, and what that meant, what it still means, is wrapped in silence, in mystery, in rhythms too faint for scholars to agree on. But the fragment suggests something chilling and fascinating, that under specific circumstances, the heart wasn't just offered, it was watched. You step cautiously toward the center, and the stillness grows heavy, like fog pressed into your bones. There are accounts, some recorded reluctantly by early missionaries, others preserved in the oral traditions of Nahua elders, of hearts placed in sacred jars, suspended in oil, or dried in herbs and wrapped in cloth, not as trophies, but as witnesses. These hearts weren't meant to be buried. They were meant to endure, to hold a beat longer than their body, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. In certain high ceremonies, they were said to be brought out at dawn, held up toward the sun, and spoken to as if they still heard. The belief wasn't metaphorical, it was physiological. The Aztecs believed that the heat of the sun could reawaken the tonali within the preserved heart, that, even without a chest to cradle it, the heart might remember how to beat, not visibly, not with muscle, but with intention. The practice wasn't widespread. It was reserved for extraordinary moments when an omen had been defied, when a prophecy was broken, or when a person's final act had aligned so perfectly with cosmic rhythm that their heart was deemed too full to discard. These were often warriors who had fought with unmatched precision, or priests whose final chants were said to make birds fall silent. Occasionally, a young child's heart, if they had wept in perfect synchrony with a rain ritual, was kept for a single moon cycle. During this time, the preserved heart was treated not as an object, but as a presence. It was housed in a small shrine, and no one turned their back to it. People whispered near it. Some say even the wind stilled when it was carried past. You walk the perimeter slowly, imagining the weight of such a heart in your hands, still warm when first placed, pulsing faintly beneath cloth. A priest would sit beside it through the night, speaking softly, not in command, but in conversation. The idea was not to preserve the organ, but the message, to give the heart a final chance to speak into the cosmos, uninterrupted by death. One priest's log, later translated under duress, described the heart of a rain sacrifice child as glowing in the dark hut, like a fire not made of flame. It is unclear whether this was poetic description or literal belief, but the line persisted, and you realize here in this moonlit hollow that for the Aztecs, the distinction between metaphor and reality didn't matter. If a thing was felt, it was true. There's another ritual, more obscure still, called the listening vigil. In it, a preserved heart was placed atop a reed mat, and a circle of chosen elders would sit silently around it through the night. No chants, no music, just breath, just waiting. It was believed that, if the heart was pure enough, it would release a sound not with vibration, but with meaning. A phrase, a symbol, a direction. The priesthood called this the heart's last light, and while no record survives of what was heard, the ceremony was never performed lightly. The heart had to be perfect. Its sacrifice had to be accepted without tremble. The body had to have climbed the temple steps without faltering, Only then could the silence around the preserved heart be trusted to receive whatever it might emit. You pause by a fallen stone, perhaps once part of a small shrine wall, and sit. The ground is damp, cool, and you think of those who kept watch not to pray, but to listen, not to mourn, but to witness. The act of keeping the heart wasn't one of attachment. It wasn't about prolonging life. It was about delaying silence, letting the rhythm taper off gently, rather than ending it with finality. The Aztecs did not believe in abrupt endings. Everything was transition, and the preserved heart was the softest form of that transition, a heartbeat echoing into time like the dying ring of a bell. Modern scholars, predictably, struggle with these stories. Some dismiss them as mistranslations, others as Spanish exaggerations. But what matters more than academic consensus is cultural consistency, because the Aztecs, in all their rituals, art, and poetry, return again and again to one idea that the heart is never truly still. Even after death, it remains in motion, if not physically, then cosmically, that its final beats don't end. They spread, they inform, and that, under rare circumstances, they might even teach. There's a passage in the Codex Borgia that shows a god holding a heart in one hand and a scroll in the other. The implication is clear. The heart writes, it records, and its testimony, if preserved, can guide. Some of the most sacred decisions in late-stage Tenochtitlan, like choosing war captains or shifting calendar festivals, were said to have been influenced not by stars, but by preserved hearts, consulted not like oracles, but like compasses. They pointed toward balance, toward correction. They remembered what humans forgot. You rise again and feel a strange tightness in your own chest, not pain, but awareness, as if your heart, steady and modern and entirely unsacrificed, still recognizes something in the story, a rhythm, a calling, and you wonder if someone preserved your heart. What would it still try to say? Would it beat with regret, with gratitude, with unfinished songs? Would it sing to the sun? Would it whisper into dreams? The Aztecs would say yes, it would, because a heart never truly belongs to the person it beats inside. It's on loan, a visitor, a musician passing through your ribcage, leaving trails of song behind. You walk out of the clearing slowly, almost reverently, as if worried your own pulse might echo too loudly. And with every step, the idea settles deeper that to preserve a heart was not to defy death, but to honor it, to stretch the moment of meaning just a little longer, to allow the gods and the people to hear more clearly, not because they were uncertain, but because rhythm deserves to fade with grace. And tonight, as your body prepares for stillness, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath softens, you may wonder what part of you will linger longest, what rhythm you've sent out into the world, what trace your heartbeat has left behind, not in blood, not in legacy, but in tone, in pacing, in presence. You don't need to be preserved to be remembered. Sometimes, it's enough that your rhythm once aligned with something greater and was heard, even for a moment, in perfect time. You emerge from the grove quietly, your body rejoining the open landscape of moonlit stone and ancient dust, though something inside you feels subtly changed, calibrated, maybe to a rhythm you hadn't fully noticed before. The city around you, once echoing with chants and heartbeat drums, is still now, but in the stillness, the heart's presence only sharpens. You step lightly across what was once a great plaza, where dancers moved like flame and ceremonies spiraled into the sky, and you arrive at the base of a step platform with narrow columns and carved serpents flanking the entrance. But this isn't a temple for war, or rain, or sacrifice in the usual sense. This is the House of Dreams Tlacopan, as it was once whispered, a sacred school of sleep, vision, and prophecy. And here, you uncover the final, quiet revelation. The Aztecs believed the heart did not only offer motion to the gods in blood, but also in dreams. For even when still, it wandered. Inside the chamber, the air smells of cold ash and faint resin. The walls curve slightly inward, guiding sound toward the center. This was intentional. Here, chosen individuals, priests, elders, And sometimes even those near death would enter prolonged ritual sleep to receive guidance from beyond. They called it Quixpanolotl, the dream of the heart, and they believed that when the body was at rest, the heart continued its journey, wandering the spiritual terrain of gods and ancestors, bringing back messages, signs, and sometimes even warnings. To the Aztecs, your dream was not just imagery, it was proof your heart still had questions to ask, and what it found, in the silence behind your ribs, could change everything. You sit at the center of the room, on a low stone mat, and imagine what it must have felt like to lie down here, not for death, not for offering, but for listening. In these chambers, rituals were performed to slow the body. Smoke from crushed herbs filled the air. A light paste of poppy and cacao might be applied to the temples not to erase awareness, but to deepen it. The dreamer was watched, not by guards, but by listeners, trained companions who sat silently, waiting for murmurs, gestures, or whispered names. For in these dreams, it was believed, the heart spoke directly, not in metaphor, but in messages. And if a dreamer woke with the name of a god on their tongue, or a vision of a cracked mountain or a bleeding star, the priest took note. These dreams guided calendar changes, diplomatic decisions, even shifts in sacrificial practice. What makes this practice more mysterious is the Aztecs' belief that the heart's dreaming could outlast the body, that even after death, especially after sacrifice, the heart might continue its motion elsewhere, and if it had been attuned in life through ritual, discipline, vision, it might dream on, not in the underworld, but in the fabric of stars, contributing wisdom to the flow of time. This is why certain hearts, especially those of dreamers, were offered not to fire or soil, but to the sky, wrapped in fine cotton, sprinkled with gold dust, and thrown into the wind from mountaintops. Their dream was believed to be too wide, too bright, to be confined. You glance up at the faint circle of open roof above the dream chamber and feel the night pour in like dark honey, and you think about your own dreams, the fleeting ones, the heavy ones, the ones you forget, and the ones that linger like fog. The Aztecs would say those dreams were your heart walking, wandering, gathering. They'd say your dreams weren't random, but resonant, that your heart ever faithful, ever speaking was still trying to report something back, something from the divine, and they believed dreams could be inherited, that if your ancestor had died with their heart in rhythm, you might receive their messages in sleep. This is why families kept small dreamstones obsidian discs that were placed beneath pillows or near cradles. These weren't just tokens, they were invitations to listen, to tune. A child who dreamed often, or accurately, was considered Iztac Yolotl, a white heart meaning pure, perceptive, and chosen. And such children were nurtured gently, not for sacrifice, but for remembrance. They were the ones who recalled what others forgot, not in waking life, but in the echoing dark. You leave the chamber slowly, the sound of your breath louder now, the pulse in your neck a presence rather than a background. You begin to understand the deeper truth that, for the Aztecs, the heart wasn't just a muscle or a symbol. It was a traveler, a recorder, a messenger. And when you dreamed, it was continuing its work, carrying you into spaces your body could never reach. The offerings weren't only made in temples, they were made in sleep, in the hush between breaths, in the silence just before waking. Sacrifice, then, wasn't limited to blade and altar. Sometimes, the offering was your attention, your willingness to dream honestly. And so, when someone died, especially someone whose dreams had shaped lives, the morning rituals were different. The heart might not be removed. Instead, it was honored with songs called Tonalpohualli, each verse corresponding to a sacred day. These songs weren't meant to summon the dead. They were meant to accompany the heart on its final journey, to give it music as it walked between worlds. The belief was that rhythm helped the heart find its next resting place or its next question. A wandering heart with no rhythm was lost, but a heart sent off with song that was a compass. You sit again now beneath the open sky, and for the first time, you're not thinking about death, not thinking about sacrifice or rituals or ceremonies. You're thinking about what your own heart might be seeking in your sleep, what it remembers that you've forgotten, what it might be trying to offer not to gods but to you. And perhaps that's the softest teaching of the Aztec way, that your heart is not just something to guard or follow or protect, but something to receive, that it holds not just your life, but the voice of something older, quieter, truer. You let your eyes close, and the wind brushes your skin, and your breath slows, and you imagine your heart stepping forward not out of your body, but into your awareness. You don't need to understand its language. You just need to feel its pacing, its patience, the way it never demands your attention, but always offers its rhythm, like a story waiting to be listened to. And maybe tonight, in your sleep, it will show you something, not with images, but with tone, with the feeling of falling and flying at once, with the echo of footsteps on ancient stone. Because whether you walk through temple ruins or lie still beneath your ceiling fan, your heart is still doing its quiet work. It is offering, not to gods of blood and flame, but to the moments that ask you to be present, to act, to feel, to pause, and every beat is a kind of whisper. Remember this, return here, stay in rhythm, and when you do, when your life begins to match your pulse, you become, in a quiet way, like the dreamers, a wanderer with a message, a heart with something left to give. You drift farther from the heart of the ruins now, feet tracing the faint outlines of paths that once pulsed with sandals, drums, and bare soles pressed into earth that carried the vibration of thousands. The city behind you recedes into silence, but its rhythm lingers. It hums in the soles of your feet. You pass between two toppled columns, one carved with what might once have been a jaguar, the other with a heart crowned in fire. The stone now so weathered it seems to blur between symbol and silence. This was a path used only on specific days, transitional days, days of eclipse, solstice, mourning. And here, you arrive at one final layer of the Aztec understanding of the heart, not the heart given by the strong, or the willing, or the anointed, but the forbidden heart. The heart that was not allowed to be sacrificed, because sometimes silence was chosen. Sometimes, the gods were not asked to listen. You come upon a small walled courtyard, square in shape, its only decoration a series of diagonal lines etched into the ground zigzags, uneven, broken. This was a place of withholding, a sanctuary not for offering, but for restraint. The Aztecs, despite everything you've seen, did not always sacrifice. Some hearts, it was believed, were too inward, too unstable, or too sacred in a different sense, and those individuals were kept apart, not punished, but protected from the blade, and from the gods, because to offer a heart that was too chaotic, or too luminous, could throw the cosmic rhythm out of alignment, could confuse the gods, or worse, could cause them to speak in riddles. This idea is harder to grasp, that there were people born whose hearts could not be touched. They were not elite, not sick, not exiled. They were simply excluded, not from ritual, but from the final step. They were allowed to serve, to prepare, to sing, but never to ascend the steps, never to be chosen. In Nahuatl, they were called Tlatlacayotl, meaning those whose flesh remains. The name carries no shame. In fact, it implies a kind of protection. Their rhythm stayed earthbound, and in rare cases, it was believed that their hearts beat inward not toward the gods, but toward memory. Some of these people were visionaries, poets, midwives, or weavers, people whose craft involved not confrontation but creation. Their hearts were considered too entangled in the weave of the world. Removing them might undo what they had touched. Their art, their insights, their healing, these things had already been offered in small doses over years. Their hearts, then, were already given. To take them again would be theft. These individuals lived under a different kind of spiritual contract. They were honored not with blood rites, but with guarding. Their homes marked discreetly with a swirl above the lintel, signaling to priests and neighbors alike, this one has already spoken. You move along the edge of the courtyard and pause at what appears to be a hearth cold now, rimmed in cracked obsidian. This, too, had a role in their path. Instead of offering their heart on an altar, they offered heat. During eclipses or plagues, These individuals lit sacred fires in their homes and kept them burning for full lunar cycles. Their fire was their heartbeat. They slept beside it, fed it, spoke to it. In some myths, the gods were said to bend down and listen through flame, hearing the heartbeat not through flesh, but through crackling wood and rising smoke. This was the slow sacrifice, the extended one, a life given not in one act, but in a series of small, daily pulses. There are few depictions of these people in codices, perhaps deliberately. They are the blanks between the symbols, the silence between songs, but some artifacts survive. A clay vessel shaped like a heart with no opening, a tapestry woven with no beginning or end. These were not decorative, they were meditative. They were a way of acknowledging that not all giving must be visible, not all rhythm must end in surrender. Some hearts were meant to remain to beat longer, not louder. Their role was to hold rhythm steady, while others let theirs go. One surviving fragment of an old Aztec proverb reads, "Not every drum is struck. Some keep time in waiting." And you think of that now, standing in the quiet square, the moonlight pooling in the dust, your own breath slow, your chest rising. You begin to see that even in a culture so often remembered for its sacrifice, there was space for retention, for hearts that weren't lifted, but listened to. The gods, after all, didn't always need blood. Sometimes, they needed someone who stayed. And perhaps that's the part that lingers longest, that the Aztecs, for all their obsession with motion and rhythm and cosmic order, knew how to pause, how to listen, how to hold a life inside its own boundaries and say, "This is enough." No altar, no ceremony, just the continuation of breath, the keeping of presence. Some of these individuals lived longer lives, others vanished quietly. No murals, no chants, but they were remembered. Their descendants carried their rhythms in lullabies, in hand-woven blankets, in the way the tortilla is flipped at just the right second. That is the long offering, the one given not with death, but with duration. You step out of the square, heart strangely full, and look back once more at the space where nothing seemed to happen until you listened, until you remembered that some hearts are not meant to rise in smoke or crumble in soil. Some are meant to walk beside us, to live all the way through, to teach us what it means to continue. The Aztecs had a word for that, tu yolpamiddle, the walking breath. It meant someone whose life carried rhythm that the world still needed, who remained not by avoidance, but by purpose. And maybe, just maybe, you're that kind. Not the heart on the altar, not the drum struck in ceremony, but the one that beats through long mornings, quiet decisions, meals shared, and questions asked. The one that doesn't need an audience to be heard. The one that knows it's already part of the rhythm without ever being lifted into the sky. You move slowly now, not because the path is difficult, but because there's nothing more to chase. The city, the chambers, the altars, they've given you everything they can. The stones no longer whisper, because they've already said enough. You walk a stretch of level earth where once a canal shimmered, its water long gone, the only trace a slight depression in the earth, and the way the night air feels cooler here. Above you, the stars hold their places with impossible stillness, and the moon, full and indifferent, washes everything in a silver so pale it feels like memory. And this is where it ends, not in revelation, but in return. Because for all the rituals, the flames, the offerings, and the blood, the truth the Aztecs carried was quieter than we imagine. Beneath all the sacrifice was a single, enduring motion. The heart beats, it gives, and then it stills. But even in stillness, it remains part of the rhythm. Nothing escapes it, not the gods, not the wind, not you. You step into the final space, a circular garden once ringed with obsidian markers, now overtaken by time. In the center, a low basin carved with a glyph for center Nahui Olin, the four-motion sun, symbol of balance, sacrifice, and endless becoming. This was where hearts that had been offered were remembered, where people came not to give, but to reflect. You sit at its edge, the stone warm from the day's last breath, and let your eyes rest on the open sky. For centuries, the Aztecs believed this place marked the heart of the world, not metaphorically, but physically. They saw themselves as living at the axis of existence, the center from which motion extended outward in every direction, and at that center, the human heart was both symbol and substance. Because what else mirrors the sun more perfectly than something that burns without flame? Here, in this closing moment, you realize the great contradiction that, to the Aztecs, giving the heart was not about ending life, but about extending it, about joining the cycle. The pulse didn't vanish, it was passed along, and in doing so, it became something more than personal. It became cosmological. A man's death fed the sun, a child's tears called the rain, a woman's steady breath over years sustained the quiet harmony of her home. Everyone gave, some quickly, some slowly, some only in presence, but no one was left untouched. The heart was not a singular possession, it was a shared fire, carried in thousands of chests, all beating, all giving, all returning. Even now, as your body lies still in this soft moment between night and sleep, your own heart continues that pattern. It doesn't ask permission, it doesn't wait for ceremony, it simply continues. And that's what the Aztecs honored most, not just the grand sacrifice, but the unceasing generosity of the heart itself, the way it gives without applause, the way it pulses through joy and despair and silence, the way it reminds you, over and over, that you are still here. You think back on everything you've seen, the sun-rising altars, the flower-strewn courts, the groves of the unnamed, the hearths of those who stayed, and the preserved hearts, suspended in oil, whispering through time, each one a variation, each one part of the same score. What remains with you is not the blood, not the blade, but the balance, the rhythm, the immense beauty of a civilization that listened so closely to the body's most primal motion and made it divine. Historians may debate the details, anthropologists may categorize the rituals, but none of them can hear your heartbeat. Only you can do that. And maybe that was the point all along, that the Aztecs weren't asking us to agree. They were asking us to remember that what pulses in you is older than language, older than empire, older than even the gods themselves. It is not yours, but you carry it. For now. You lie back now, your head supported by the earth, and feel how the quiet wraps around you like cloth. The wind is soft, the stars do not blink, and your heart continues its gentle rhythm, unbothered, unafraid. In this final reflection, there's no ceremony left to perform, no chant to recite, just the sound beneath your ribs, saying the same thing it always has. I am here. I give. I return. Let yourself rest now. Let the rhythm fade, not in fear, but in fullness. The stories have been told. The echoes have quieted. The drums have grown still. You're no longer walking stone paths or tracing glyphs with your fingers. You're simply breathing, slowly, softly, exactly as you are meant to. What the Aztecs understood beneath all the ceremony was this: that nothing is ever truly lost. Not motion, not rhythm, not presence. The heart, even when it ceases to beat, leaves something behind, a trace, a tone, a warmth in the air. So if you feel anything now, a quiet heaviness, a slow comfort, a gentle pulse behind your eyes, it's not illusion, it's remembrance. Your body remembering that it belongs to a much older rhythm, one that does not end when the stories do, one that lingers in sleep, in dreams, in silence. Let your body sink, let your thoughts blur. You've walked far tonight, not across distance, but through time, and now there's nowhere left to go. You've arrived, not at a destination, but at stillness. Breathe in, breathe out, let the rhythm be enough. Let it carry you, let it hold you,